It's trashy, I know. Let me just say right now, I know it was trashy. But my girlfriend has a strange places fetish. We've done the deed in some pretty public places, and while it's awesome, it's very risky, obviously. We did get caught once, on a walking trail. It was in the middle of the night and hardly anyone takes the trail that late. So we went from walking to doing the horizontal mambo, and of course, some old guy with the flashlight comes around the corner. She turned. I covered her, but the guy saw a lot of me. It was mortifying, so we tried to smile through it and wave him ahead. But he took it upon himself to lecture us about public decency and how ashamed we should be, and if he ever caught his daughter out here, yada yada. I'm sure you can imagine pretty much exactly how it went. So I told her we needed a break from the more public part of our adventures. She agreed, and a few nights later, we went to the graveyard. Literally, the graveyard of graveyards. It's massive, big enough for about 14 different drivable lanes, and probably 50 or more tombs or mausoleums, whatever they are, and a ridiculous amount of regular graves with regular headstones. Some gravestones were in shapes of benches, angels, chalices, crosses, crying maidens. You know, the lady in the robe looking ones. Mother Mary, maybe. Anyways, just a huge variety. So we walked around for a little while. We both liked creepy stuff, and it was chilly enough that walking was nice. The graveyard has enough trees that you never really feel exposed anywhere, but it's not exactly a forest either. We walked and talked, and eventually, she stepped to the side and read aloud from a really nice black marble gravestone. Here lies Slade Berta, whose final studies of death brought him here. Whatever the hell that means. She shook her head and looked back at me, then leaned over the gravestone and smiled while looking at me. Now, obviously, I'm not going into the details of that, so if you're reading this far hoping for that kind of not safe for work, you are mistaken. But there was some movement, some forceful pushing, and that last push ended with a loud cracking sound. By the time I realized what was happening, the top half of the gravestone slid forward and hit the ground. She almost fell forward, but I caught her. I felt all sorts of emotions. The relief was immediately overshadowed by the fact that we had just broken a rather expensive-looking gravestone. Like someone's last memento to the living world, and we just destroyed it. She stepped back, quickly fixing herself, and looked at me with the same shocked expression I must have been wearing. That sucks, I finally said, taking a deep breath and sighing. I put my hands on top of my head and mouthed the four-letter word reserved for times like this when I screw up big time. Yeah, I think this is how people get cursed. We're definitely cursed now, right? She asked with a flimsy smile. One of the many things I liked about her was her attempt to make everything better with some lighthearted joke. Oh, for sure. I lifted my arms up dramatically and made my voice sound ghostly deep and spooky. Return the slab. We looked at each other. Any other time we would have laughed, but with post-nut clarity, I knew that my options were A. Own up to it and tell someone, or B. Fix it and live with knowing I broke a gravestone and screwed up this guy's afterlife marker. Either way, I did need to return the slab. Help me put it back. I'll call someone in the morning. Tell him that I sat down on it or something. It didn't make sense, but it was the best I had. My girlfriend didn't critique my story. She just stepped back around to the other side. I walked around, grabbed my half, she grabbed hers, and we lifted while moving it back to the bottom half. Oh, hold on, set it down, I said, noticing the hollowed out center of the gravestone. What is it? She asked, now seeing it too. We carefully set the top half back on the ground and reached in the small hollow that had been hidden inside the black marble gravestone. The only thing inside was a book. Not leather, not ordinary paper. It wasn't skin either, so that was good. It was some kind of book cloth, which meant it was smooth, malleable, and felt nice. I removed the book and pulled out my phone to use the flashlight. The book was just pure gray with no symbols or words. I flipped through the pages and saw that nearly every page was filled. Mostly words, but some sketches and diagrams. The title was on the first page. Thanatology from both sides. The title, like the rest of the book, was handwritten like a diary or journal, it seemed. Everything since removing that book has gone horribly wrong. We did replace the slab, and I kept the book with me. I figured I could put it back when the time came to face whoever I had about breaking the gravestone. Obviously, I should have left the book in the hollow. That night, I had some of the worst dreams I've ever had. I was in a study, sitting at a rather nice-looking desk that was filled with old parchment paper and scrolls. Literal scrolls, like I was in some medieval room, and maybe I was. There was a fireplace, roaring with flames that came up and over the mantel. Too much flame, but it didn't seem to spread, and the heat wasn't unbearable. There were glass tubes, cylinders, vats that bubbled, and on a shelf were 3 skulls of various sizes. But all of this was just a backdrop for the man that sat across from me. He seemed unaware of my presence as he scribbled furiously in a book, the gray book. I lifted myself up a little and peeked over the desk. "She's pregnant," the man said. Even in my dream, I felt my stomach drop and my heart skip a beat. Was he talking to me? About my girlfriend, Helen? The man looked up at me, and now I was looking right back into his face. After the initial surprise passed, I realized he was not looking at me, but through me. I turned around and saw another person standing in the doorway. The light from the fire avoided them, as if they were meant to stay hidden. "An opportunity," the figure responded, a woman's voice. "An opportunity for what? Distractions? How can I understand death when I'm distracted with life?" the man asked. He closed the journal angrily and looked sharply at the figure. "An opportunity to see death during the birth of life," the woman said simply, as if it was obvious. The man raised an eyebrow, slowly understanding. "An opportunity." He smiled, a sinister smile. The flames roared higher, and only then did I feel the heat. It was fierce. It crawled across the room. The woman, the man, neither noticed. They didn't move or speak as the flames washed over them, consuming the room, but I felt it, burning my skin and charring my lungs. I screamed and woke up coughing intensely. Helen switched the light on beside me. Kirk, are you all right?" she asked as I continued to cough and reached for the water I always kept on my nightstand. I drank it, and I felt the cold water touch where the fire had scorched my insides. But it hadn't. Not really. It was a dream, a nightmare. "Is something burning?" Helen asked. I nearly dropped the bottle when I looked at her. "What?" I asked, stunned. Helen sniffed the air. "Nothing. I thought I smelled something burning. It's gone. It wasn't toast. I don't think I'm having a stroke." I didn't have the words to tell her about my dream. I didn't understand it enough to explain any of it. I told her instead that I was all right, and for her to go back to sleep. But sleep for me was something I couldn't do. After a couple feeble hours of lying in bed, remaining stuck with the feeling of being burned alive. I gave up. I carefully got out of bed and made my way to the living room, to the book. I switched on the lamp and opened the door. In a matter of days, I will have the opportunity to witness the definition of creation. With the birth of my child, I will see firsthand the power of life, and I will bond it with the gift of my death. At my hands, 20 men and women have been given to the goddess of death to better understand what it means to die. But what happens when life and death become one? With the proper chemicals, I am convinced that I can assist my wife in the birth of death. Even after death, my child will still be born. The opportunity to understand death during such a moment is paramount to furthering my studies of death. I closed the book and felt sick to my stomach. I checked the cover, the back. I flipped through the pages for any trace of burns from that nightmare vision, but the book was in excellent condition. The fire was only a nightmare, but what had I seen? What happened? It did happen, right? I finally fell asleep on the couch with the book dropped on the floor beside me. The next day, I took a little online searching to find who was in charge of the graveyard. And after calling them, we were prompted to leave a message. I left my name and number in a short message. I'm calling to tell someone that one of the gravestones were damaged. It may need some repair or something, whatever it is you folks do. The name on the stone was Slade Alberta. And the book? Helen asked, not loud enough for the machine to pick up on. I felt the book in my hand, considered it. All right, that's it. Give me a call back if you need any more information. I hung up, looking at Helen, who looked back with some confusion. It's a weird book. I want to read a little more of it, I said truthfully. She rolled her eyes and sighed. You're gonna be haunted. I smirked for my reply. I couldn't tell her no, I wouldn't be, because at the time, I didn't realize how right she was. Every day that I read that book, I had nightmares that felt more like memories. The book wasn't long by any means, but with a hectic schedule of work and life, I made time when I could read a few pages here and there. Despite the nightmares, I continued. It took 4 days for the graveyard caretaker to call me back. When she did, a woman named Pine, when she called me back, I was nearly ready to deliver the book to her myself, just to be rid of it. Once we got the formalities out of the way, she said, Well, I just wanted to reach out and say thank you for telling me about the gravestone. I thought you'd like to know that it was taken care of by the family and the stone was fixed. Fixed? How? I asked. Oh, well, to keep it simple, it's sort of like a glue compound we have. Then it's held in place until solid again, she informed me. I nodded reflexively like she could see me, then realized she had said family. Wait, Miss Pine, you said the family fixed it? Is that right? Yes, sir. In almost all cases, it's the family's responsibility to fix and maintain the headstones. When no family is present, it's on us. Would you be able to get me in touch with the family? I asked. The line was quiet for a minute. I could almost feel Pine considering my request, so I added, I'd just like to pay my respects. It's been weighing on me after seeing the stone broken. I bit my lip. It was true, of course. It had been weighing on me, but not because of the stone. Screw the stone. It was the book I found in the hollow. The one detailing death and the man's pursuit of understanding death, even going so far as to orchestrate the stillborn birth of his own child. The details of which had been equally horrific in the following pages. Well, normally I wouldn't, But seeing as you were kind enough to call, sure, Pine said back. Then she gave me a name and number. I sat at my kitchen table for a while, just looking at the number I had written down. Helen was at work and would be for another 3 hours. I took a moment, gathered myself, and called. It only rang once. "Hello?" asked a man's voice. I didn't say anything right away. My eyes searched my kitchen like I was looking for words to appear on the wall. "Hello?" he asked again. Jesus, these damn car warranty. "Hello, hey, sorry, I'm not spam or whatever," I said quickly, finding my voice. "I'm calling to tell you it was me that found your grave, the damaged gravestone." I rolled my eyes at my own inability to speak clearly. "Ah," the voice said, followed by a pause. "Yes, thank you for that. It's been mostly taken care of." "Mostly?" I asked. The voice was calm, collected, smooth, and it made me unsettled hearing him say, "Yes, mostly. Because you see, the stone was a box of sorts, for something that was to remain sealed away. It appears whoever broke the stone stole the item." He wasn't curious. He wasn't just telling. He knew. He knew it was me. I don't know how he knew this, but I knew. He knew. "Have you read the book?" he asked slowly. I almost hung up. Honestly, I wanted to drop my phone in the sink and run the water. Instead, I replied, "Yes." It was all I managed to say. He sighed, or groaned rather, into the phone. "Well, you didn't finish it. If you did, you'd be dead." I somehow knew he was telling the truth. "Death is complicated," he went on to say. "I spent my whole life trying to understand it, and when I finally learned everything I could while alive, I finished writing that book. And do you know what she gave me in exchange for a lifetime of study?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to breathe properly, and I didn't want him to keep talking. Every word was like adding ice to my already chilled blood. But he did have more to say. He didn't wait for me to respond before he continued. "She denied me the one thing I desired, the final step in my studies," he huffed. "Cruel, cruel bitch." "You're Slade? You killed your child?" I said, the only thing I could think of. "Children. So many of them." He sounded regretful, but I wonder if it was for the children or for himself. A seemingly endless supply of subjects. How easy is it to create life? Of course, I was limited by the mothers. They hated me, rightfully so, and in time, they became subjects on their own. I felt sick to my stomach and had to switch hands because the one holding the phone had become sweaty. The man sighed again. "The book belongs with the dead," he said simply. "You don't want it back? You don't want your book?" I asked, angry of how casually this man talked about killing his own children. "Want it back? No, I never want to see it again. It cost me everything." "Your wives, your children, you didn't deserve them," I snapped back. "My wives and children," he replied slowly. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't slow. It was me that had been confused. I realized my mistake. "Death. It cost you death. That's all you care about?" I asked, utterly stunned. "She'll come for you, and for that, I'm envious. Read the book or don't. It doesn't matter to me. I'll be here when your butt dusts. I'll always be here. And so will that damned book, hidden among the dead, where it belongs. Then he hung up, just like that. I tried to call back. I tried until the number was disconnected. I went back to his grave a few days later, plagued by nightmares that grew more and more vivid and terrifying. But his headstone was gone. And that night, as I exhumed his grave, I learned that his grave never existed. No body, no casket. It was only ever a headstone. I buried the book in the hole I had dug, where the grave should have been, and it appeared back in my house within an hour. So I did the only thing that made sense. I found a new graveyard and bought a marker with a secret hollow, just big enough for the book. And there it remains. I won't tell you where or whose name is on it. I won't tell you if it looks old or new. It could be a simple stone or an angel, or even just a chalice. It could be across the country, or it could be in your own town. But I will tell you that every now and then, I ride by and check on it. I don't stop, and I don't get too close. But that last night I rode by it for the first time in months, and saw a woman standing over it. A woman I had only seen in a nightmare. I've always had a fascination for the paranormal, investigating ghost stories and urban legends since I was a kid. If I ever heard a story that included the words, "They say, if you go there at midnight," then I was there at midnight, waiting for a genuine encounter. In hindsight, I wish that I hadn't. If you chase a shadow long enough, you're bound to find the caster. Trust me when I say this, you don't want to know. Yeah, I know that's how these stories usually begin. Please don't read this, or I don't care if you believe me. It piques your curiosity, keeps you listening. Well, I'm warning you now, and I want you to listen carefully. You don't want to know. Keep your thrills vicarious. Stay behind your computer monitor where it's safe. You're better off wondering and guessing. Because curiosity without discretion is a dangerous thing. I'm going to tell you how I learned it the hard way, and I hope it will keep most of you from meddling too much for your own good. You don't want to find yourself living like me. I'm not even sure I can call it living anymore. I only hope I can finish this in time, because most of the time I have these days doesn't belong to me. There have been so many myths, tales of gods, demons, spirits, and creatures of worlds beyond our own. The old stories changed over time, and beliefs changed with them. Yet, somehow, mankind has always feared and worshipped the same things. Psychologists see it as a need for closure. They say we fear the unknown and would accept anything to make sense of the world, even if it means believing in a total fabrication. Everything has a rational explanation, right? We live in a secular age, so that's the assumption. Then again, they also say, where there is smoke, there is fire. When I heard and read all of these stories, I came to question what society told me. Could they all really be the superstitions of ignorant primitives, inspired by firelight, paranoia, and mind-altering substances? Or were these truly things to be feared, even before the songs and legends? That's what I wanted to find out. So, I buried my nose in mythology books and ghost stories, and I kept my ear to the ground for urban legends. I explored them all. Well, all the local ones anyway. I tested everything, from the ghost ships of the Hudson River to the infamous Bloody Mary. Every search was a disappointment, but it never discouraged me. It was a great hobby, and I still went through the motions just for the thrill. As I had come to expect, I never exactly struck gold. That is, not until the night of the blackout, at 3rd and Main. It was the night of spring break, after a long and grueling semester. Most of the other students migrated to Manhattan for loud, obnoxious parties. My small group of friends and I, on the other hand, preferred peace and quiet. Apparently, peace and quiet on that particular night meant a trip to a lively Irish pub called Piper's Kilt. Don't ask me what the hell we were thinking. I couldn't tell you. That is where I met a drunken, old immigrant by the name of Tom. Tom was a strange man, which made the conversation all the more entertaining, even if we did have to shout over some surprisingly upbeat song about a sinking ship. Over the customary pint of Guinness, I told him about my little hobby, and he told me a story that I now wish I'd never heard. He said that Irish tradition runs far deeper than its Catholic years, and he told me about the long-held Celtic legends of the Fae. He told me of the Banshee, of the Formian giants, and the leprechauns. To that last one he added, "I'll have you know, they are not the little people you've been told of, Sonny Jim." Aside from the conversation, the audience participation folk songs tend to grow on you once you're good and buzzed. And we stayed longer than I had expected. After a few more rounds, the night ended just as one would expect. A sobering visit to a terrible diner with terrible coffee. A dear friend also made it a point to get hammered beyond the point of no return, and I had to drive him home so he wouldn't end up parking his car in someone's living room. I slept on the couch with the intent of taking him to pick up his car in the morning, provided that he didn't wind up in a coma. I would have been a hypocrite to look down on him, though. He had done the same for me in the past, twice. So, after helping him up to his bedroom, nearly breaking my back in the process, I retired to the couch. I passed out after 4 episodes of an I Love Lucy marathon and a couple of annoying infomercials. Ordinarily, after a hearty helping of alcohol, it wouldn't take me so long to find sleep. That, however, was when in my own bed. I never slept well in strange places. Plus, I still had the spirited racket of the old dun cow running through my head, along with old Tom's fascinating stories. I wish those waking hours would have lasted. They're the last normal memories I have. The last memories that I can confidently call my own. A few hours later, well into the hangover I had earned, I woke up to a dark house. Every standby light for every electronic device turned black, including the clocks. I peered through the window behind me, lifted one of the blinds, and stared out across the street. Every porch light had died at some point in the night, and I couldn't see much of anything. I figured a storm must have rolled overhead and killed the power on the block. I'd slept through louder things on nights like this, after all. I was ready to write it off and go back to sleep, but then I looked at my watch. The second hand ticked just past midnight. then slowed to a stop. Old Tom's final story came to mind. The old believers called him the Black Gambler, he told me. Tempter and trickster of the Fae folk. The greedy for wealth and power bartered with him their souls. Called him on the darkest midnight hour, and he came as a dark man at the crossroads. It could have been a coincidence, sure. Most people probably would have ignored it. I, however, had a tendency to dismiss reason in favor of whimsy. It came with the territory. If ever there was a time to test the myth, I wouldn't have found one better. Of course, I had no expectations, as usual. I would take 5 minutes of my time to humor the old man, another 2 or 3 to take a much-needed leak, and head back to bed. With that plan in mind, I stepped through the front door and into the night. My first thought was that my previous assumption was wrong. I could smell no rainfall, could feel no moisture on the air, and there were no puddles or wet spots. There had been no storm. It didn't stir me, though. Blackouts can have other causes. More concerning was the darkness and silence. It felt foreboding and wrong, but I dismissed it like everything else. I was just allowing my mind to play tricks on me. That was all. Just letting myself feel the fear I was supposed to feel. And the feeling subsided a bit when I saw the starlight overhead. That is his meeting place, he told me. Crossroads represent choice and consequence, and that's where you'll find him if he hears your call. So, minding my step in the dark, I approached the nearest intersection to my wasted friend's porch, and I glanced at the street sign as I stood at the curb. 3rd and Main. I stared at it for a moment before fishing in my jacket pocket for the next step. If you wish an audience with the Black Gambler, you must dig a shallow hole at your nearest corner. In that hole, bury a single key. That is your ticket to the space between our world and theirs. The space where he can see you, and he may allow you to see him. Somehow, when I followed Tom's story, I'd imagined an old, dirt road in an open field. I'd imagined an old antique key, a heavy thing that you might suspect would open a dungeon or an old cellar. It felt ridiculous to make do with what I had on hand, and I hoped this Fae person wouldn't be too particular. Fortunately, I had a selection of useless keys that could have impressed a janitor. I pulled out my key ring and selected a forgotten old thing that probably opened a padlock I'd lost. Part of its silver coating peeled away from the copper base. I removed a hefty clump of my dear friend's front lawn and placed it beneath. Then, returned the soil and patted it in. The job wasn't neat, but I doubt he would have cared. He wasn't exactly a proud gardener. Once that key is in the earth, you've opened the door between our world and theirs. Only mortals with dire purpose venture to the land between. So be careful and be sure. Be sure you're ready, lad, and don't step into the road until you are. With a deep, sarcastic breath, I assured myself that I was sure and took my first step into the road, heading for the center of the intersection. I stood there, waiting, with my acquired cynical streak, for 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 10 minutes. 10 minutes became 20. 20 minutes became a week. which became 30 seconds, 2 days, 5 months, an hour, 20 years, an instant and an eternity. Before I knew what was happening, my sense of time slipped away as I spiraled into a sudden, seemingly endless nightmare. At some moment in that timeless hell, the trance over me subsided, and I became aware of my surroundings again. This was the land between. I had expected it to be a state of mind, some exaggeration of an old druid's meditation. But it was real. That is, if real is an accurate word to describe it, it was unlike any place on earth, unlike anything I had ever felt. It's hard to explain to someone who has never set foot there, but I'll try. At first glance, it looks much like the same as it does in our world. It has the same structures, the same colors, but you know something isn't right. That world is too still, like a rigor mortis snapshot of something that should be alive. There's no wind, no breath of life. It's a world not meant for us, and you come into it deaf and numb. You feel no heat or cold against your skin. You don't feel the ground beneath your feet, not even the movements of your own body. It's like an unending tomb, a world of stone where you feel nothing and float aimlessly in complete silence. Listen to a voice, lad. That's him talking. You'll know it when you hear it. He sees you. That's when your test begins. Of course I'd know it when I heard it. It would be the only thing I could possibly hear. Sure enough, I did. It was faint, almost not there at all, but I heard it. Under any other circumstances, I doubt I would have called it a voice. No human lips were forming these syllables, and that deep groan was not a sound from human vocal cords. Nevertheless, it was speaking to me. I can't tell you what it said, if anything at all. It was just an acknowledgement of some sort, maybe even a greeting. It terrified me. You will first meet with the great beast, a thing of nightmares, and it'll know you better than you know yourself. You will face it, and you will face all of your fears, all of the things that ever struck your heart cold, all of the things that ever haunted your dreams. But don't run, he warned me. You must not run. To do so will break the right, and to break the right is an insult to the gambler. You won't want to insult him, Sonny Jim. I can promise you that. The thing approached, and I felt its rumbling steps beneath my feet. Whatever robbed me of my senses began to return them ever so slowly. Or perhaps they returned on their own, out of some overpowering, instinctive necessity. Whatever the case, I would receive the beast with every primal sense fully alert. It emerged from the darkness down the road, a colossal mountain of fur and muscle, towering over the dead street lamps, its grotesque form veiled in silhouette. It seemed all at once as a giant wildcat, a hulking bull and a monstrous bear, and it lowered its face, less than 2 feet from mine. It growled and huffed, its breath like a hot sandstorm stinging my face, and I saw myself in its eyes. I saw myself as it saw me. That is where the true terror began. Old Tom was right. I did face all of my fears, every one of them, The fear of death, the fear of heights, of drowning, the fear of losing my job or dying alone, the fear of accomplishing nothing in my life, and fearing the pressure of responsibility of leadership, the fear of my creepy neighbor across the hall, the fear of lightning storms and of the dark, even my childhood fears, once funny in hindsight, came crawling back. The fear of seeing my grandmother for the first time without her dentures, the fear of the monster in my closet, the fear of large dogs, the fear of the old school bully, and the fear I felt when I was separated from my mom at a crowded mall. He'll be watching if you pass the test, because most don't. He'll take an interest in you. He'll come to you as a man in a dark cloak, and he'll ask you a question, a choice, one that only you can make. I didn't run, but it wasn't out of bravery. It was because I was frozen in fear, my legs quaking beneath me, and in genuine tears that I hadn't spilt since I was a kid. I no longer needed to take that leap that I'd planned for. I stood there for another eternity, failing to catch my breath for much of it. Then, I saw him standing at the corner, staring at me. He wasn't a man in a dark cloak. He wasn't really a man at all. The tales twist over time through poetic embellishment and mistranslation, so what you hear is never completely truthful. Then again, nothing the storyteller's spin could prepare you for the reality of these things. There are simply no words to describe them. Even I am likely misleading you now, though I'm trying to be as literal as possible. Most cultures have their stories about him, and the way most describe him is honestly the most accurate way possible. He is a dark man at the crossroads, at all crossroads, and all crossroads belong to him. He didn't move at first. Instead, he spoke to me, and his voice was a soft breeze on the stillness. A wordless whisper. He did offer me a choice, though it wasn't a question. It was simply a curiosity for my will and true desire. If I truly wished for what was to come, my answer came in spite of me. And the answer was, yes. Yes, I would commit a sacrifice for his gift. Yes, a higher purpose mattered more than my life. And yes, I would do what was required of me for these things. He approached me, and I felt a biting chill blow past me as he neared. The closer he came, the less distinct he appeared. His shape wasn't that of a man, but that of a man's shadow suspended in the air, nebulous and immaterial. At brief moments, I could see the vague suggestions of a face, but never enough to read his expression. He stood motionless before me for several minutes, and then extended to me one intangible hand. Present the gambler with a possession of yours, an item of personal importance. He will turn it over in his hands for a time, understanding its meaning to you, and he will return it to you, along with a gift. I had nothing of particular value on me at the time, let alone of personal value. I felt through my pockets until I came upon my old Zippo lighter. An old girlfriend passed it on to me once she decided to quit smoking. Funny thing was, she picked up the habit again after the stress of the breakup, and she wanted it back. Perhaps for an immature laugh, I decided to hang on to it. That was about the extent of its meaning to me. I didn't love it, but I liked it, and I hoped that would be enough. He did just as old Tom said, and I swear I saw a smile in those vague moments of his face. In those last minutes, he didn't just examine that lighter. He judged my value, because this was not really a gift. It was an exchange, and after he was certain of his investment, he returned the lighter to me. As he placed the lighter back in my hand, the moment it touched my skin, the world went black. It was in that last instant of consciousness that I wished I had taken Tom's final words seriously. He will return it to you, along with a gift, in exchange for 7 years' service. He always collects, so be sure this is what you want, lad. Be sure that it's worth it, because your life belongs to him now. Since then, my life has been one of hazy nightmares, amnesia, and moments of clarity. I have gone to sleep at night, waking some days later in a sewer tunnel, completely naked, and holding mysterious, still warm bloody masses in my hands. I have blacked out in mid-conversation, waking to see a television news report about a massive fire, and the arsonist fit my description. I have faint memory of places I don't recognize, people I've never met, and places that shouldn't exist. I have torrential dreams of the lands between, standing at my master's side, like a pet on a leash. The next time I saw Jack, the friend I drove home that night, it was at the doorstep of his family home, with his wife and 2 children. He looked well, even fit. When I knew him, he was a sloppy, overweight bachelor and had bad luck with women. He'd also worn a ponytail in those days, and he was now balding. He said he hadn't seen me in years, that everyone assumed I was dead. I begged for his help, and the next thing I knew, I awoke in a dark alley somewhere. I was covered in bruises and cuts, and I was holding Jack's bloodied wallet in my right hand. I don't know how long it has been, but I've had a terrible realization. When it was said that he would demand 7 years of service, it didn't mean 7 years from that night. It meant 7 years in total. I am a slave, and I can be spirited away at any moment. Sometimes, I'll be fine for months at a time. Sometimes, I'll have my life back on track, assuming that the nightmare is over. But he always calls for me again. I haven't even had the time to learn of the gift he has given me. Like many before me, I am ensnared in his web, and until my debt is paid in full, I am his unwitting puppet. I may never be free. This is the last time I will say it. Stay behind your computer monitor where it's safe. You don't want to know. It's just not worth it. Convince yourself that these things aren't true, and keep your curiosity in check. Force yourself to lose interest and find a new hobby, if you can. If not for your sake, then for mine. I've already found the blood of too many meddlers on my hands. As it is. I was staying at a hotel in Chicago during a business trip, and I was going to stay for the whole weekend. It was an older hotel, one that still used small keys rather than key cards to enter the rooms. I didn't mind it. It seemed nice to get away from the onslaught of technology. When I checked into the hotel, it was packed full. A nasty storm had struck, stranding many tourists and canceling flights. No more rooms were available, and many people were being turned away because of the lack of availability. When I approached the front desk to check in, I noticed that all the keys on the rooms on the 8th floor were still on the wall. Not a single key was missing. It seemed odd that an entire floor would be vacant when so many people were clamoring to check in and get to their rooms. I could see the clerk was stressed out and was ready to just give up and go home, so I tried to lighten the mood. Kind of weird, isn't it? What is? The clerk asked. How everyone on the 8th floor is missing. The clerk gave me an odd look and his face paled. What do you know about the 8th floor? He replied in a serious tone. Oh, nothing, I answered honestly, a little embarrassed that my attempt to lighten the mood backfired. I just noticed that all the keys on the 8th floor are still behind the desk. The clerk blushed a little and tried to laugh it off. Oh, yeah, I see now. He went back to checking me in and handed me the key to my room on the 9th floor. Enjoy your stay. I will, thanks. I awkwardly accepted the key and grabbed my bag, heading for the elevator. Just like the lobby, the elevator was also packed. It was difficult to stand next to so many strangers so close by, let alone enter and exit the small car. I struggled to reach and press the button for the 9th floor, but I managed to see over the crowd of people and reach the button panel. It was then that I noticed that the button seemed to be missing a floor number, 8. That's funny, I thought out loud. I wonder why there's no button for the 8th floor. But no one in the elevator reacted. They either didn't care or they were too preoccupied and didn't hear me. Once I finally got to my floor and checked into my room, I took a moment to relax and unwind on the bed. I had to give a presentation tomorrow and I needed to be alert. I decided to go to bed early that night and to practice my speech a few times to make sure I sounded confident. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror as I practiced my sales pitch a few times. A strange groaning sound from the room beneath me got my attention. It sounded like there was a man in pain or upset about something. I ignored it and continued to practice my speech. The groaning from the lower floor continued on, getting louder and louder by the minute. Angrily, I stomped on the floor as hard as I could and shouted out, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" There was no response. The groaning stopped. Satisfied that the man realized he was making too much noise, I continued to practice my speech. Just as I finished the first half of my speech, the groaning began again. But this time, it was much louder and angry. If this was going to go on all night, there was no way I'd be prepared for my presentation tomorrow. I knocked on my neighbor's door and was greeted with a grumpy response from a young woman and her new husband. "Excuse me," I politely tried to engage in conversation. "Do you hear that noise in the room below us?" "No." The woman sounded more confused than grouchy now. "We haven't heard anything until you pounded on our door." "Oh, I'm sorry." I apologized, once again feeling embarrassed. "Must be the pipes or something then." I tried to think of a possible alternate explanation so I didn't sound like a crazy person. "Well, I'll call management then. Sorry about that. You guys have a good night." The couple shut the door and locked it. I returned to my room where the groaning noise continued. I picked up the phone on the small table next to the bed and called the front desk to complain about the noise. When I mentioned that it seemed to be coming from the room beneath me, a room on the 8th floor, the woman who answered the phone suddenly got quiet. "Sir, there is no one checked in that room. It must be someone on the 9th floor." "No," I tried to sound confident. "It's not coming from the walls, it's coming from the floor." "Well," the woman sounded rattled, and I could sense that she was trying to think of an explanation just to get me to hang up. "I'll call the maintenance crew. It's probably a leaky pipe or a problem with the heating ducts." "Yeah, thanks." I hung up the phone, not believing her for an instant. The groaning was growing louder and angrier by the minute. I put my hands to my ears and tried to block out the noise, but it wasn't enough. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower and the sink full blast, hoping the running water would drown the noise and at least help me a little bit. I sat on the bathroom floor, trying to think of a way to get some sleep, but I didn't have any other options. All the rooms were full. I couldn't request a new room, and there was no way any other hotel would have any vacancies during the storm. Suddenly, the pipes on the shower began rattling violently. The shaking was so strong that it caused the shower to sputter as it continued to run. The sound was like thunder inside the walls and the thunder outside the hotel, as well as the pounding rain. Sounded like there was a freight train barreling down the tracks right at me. I left my room, grabbing my keys and my phone. I made my way to the elevator so I could lodge a complaint in the lobby. As soon as I stepped inside the elevator, I remembered that the 8th floor couldn't be accessed. The number was not an option. And I remembered that all the keys on the 8th floor were still behind the desk at the lobby. How could anyone check into a room on the 8th floor? Curious, I exited the elevator and made my way for the stairs. I walked down the stairwell from the 9th floor and directly onto the 7th. That's impossible, I told myself. I walked back up the stairs and double-checked the floor numbers. Sure enough, just like the elevator, there was no number 8. I walked up and down the staircase a few times, trying to figure out what was going on, when I noticed a small imperfection in the wall next to the doorway that led onto the 7th floor. I checked and realized that it was a gap. The gap was between a hidden door and its frame. Using my fingertips, I pried the door open and found a small staircase leading back up one flight, up to the otherwise non-existent 8th floor. It was dark and dusty, like no one had used this passageway in years. I used the screen on my phone to light my way as I made my way up the secret staircase. There was another door at the top of the stairs. It wasn't sealed away or hidden. It was easily accessible. The door was number 8. Opening the door, I found myself on the 8th floor and alone. I could just feel it. There was no one else on the floor with me. It was dark in the long hallway. Not even the exit signs were lit up. I continued to use my phone as I walked down the hallway, checking each door as I passed. They were all locked. That is, except for one door. The unlocked door was for the room directly beneath mine. I knocked once, just to make sure no one was secretly checked into the room, but no one replied. I opened the door, still trying to figure out why this door was unlocked, and found myself standing in a room that mirrored my own perfectly. The lights didn't work. I tried the switch a few times, but there was no power on this floor. "Hello?" I called out into the room. Is anyone in here?" Still, no response. I went over to the phone and picked it up, but the line was dead. The amount of dust and cobwebs told me that no one was in this room and no one had been in here for quite some time, but I felt compelled to look around. I opened the door to the bathroom and was taken aback by what I saw in the room. There was a bathtub in the room, unlike mine which had a shower, and the tub was full of water. The water was at the top of the tub, threatening to spill over at any moment. I stepped closer, still using my phone to light the way, when I noticed a dark figure in the tub. It looked like a man, a dead man. Shining my phone over the tub, I stared down into the still water, as if in a trance, trying to look at the man's dead face. As my senses slowly came back to me, the man's eyes opened and he looked directly at me. I fell back on the floor, dropping my phone and losing my light. A splashing sound came from the tub and I could feel the water spilling onto the floor, soaking into my clothes. The sound of heavy, wet footsteps exited the tub. The second footstep was all the motivation I needed to get up and run. I bolted from the room, not caring about my phone or who the man was and ran down the hall back to the door from whence I entered. I ran down the stairs, all the way down into the lobby, and didn't stop until I collided with the desk. Breathlessly, I tried to tell the clerk what I had seen and that we needed to call the police. The clerk, who looked scared, not so much as me because there was a dead body in the hotel, but more like he was afraid of getting fired, escorted me to the manager's office behind the desk. "Sir," the clerk tried to sound calm and reassuring, "what did you see exactly?" I told him what I had seen and what I had heard. I showed him the wet spots on my clothes where the tub's water splashed on me. I didn't care if I got arrested for trespassing or causing a disturbance. I had to tell someone what happened. The clerk listened intently to my story, not blinking, not looking away. When I finished, he got up and walked over to a large file cabinet. He pulled open an unmarked drawer and began thumbing through an extensive collection of files. Pulling a file from the drawer, he opened it up and pulled out a very old newspaper article. "Is this the man you saw?" he asked and handed me the article. I looked at the clipping and felt my stomach drop. It was him. That was the man. The clerk sat down across from me and smiled a little. "You're not the first to see him." That was not the reaction I was expecting. "Read the article. It should help clear things up for you." The article told the story of a man who had gone away on business and returned home to discover that his pregnant wife had been cheating on him and that the baby wasn't his. Heartbroken and betrayed, the man checked himself into the hotel and never left his room. He was heard crying and wailing in heartbreak for 3 days before he finally stopped. When the maid entered his room to clean, she found his body in the bathtub. He had taken his own life, drowning himself after ingesting many sleeping pills. Is this why you don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor? Because of him?" I asked, feeling more at ease knowing that I wasn't crazy. "No," the clerk admitted. "He's only one of the reasons we don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor." What? What do you mean?" The clerk just smiled again. "You see that filing cabinet?" "Yeah." "And that unmarked drawer at the bottom?" "Yeah," I answered again. "What of it?" "That drawer contains every reason we don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor. Ever since this hotel opened in 1873, we've had people die in very unusual ways, always on the 8th floor." "That's strange," I commented, feeling a little queasy. What's stranger is the fact that no two deaths were the same, and no two deaths ever took place in the same room. Each room on the 8th floor has housed a tragic death, and each room has been reportedly haunted by the dead. That sent a shiver up my spine. "What? How? Are you telling me the 8th floor is cursed? Anyone who checks into a room is going to die or be haunted?" The clerk bowed his head. "It's not just the rooms that have seen death. Maintenance workers have died attempting simple repairs. One man was electrocuted trying to fix the lights. Another fell down the elevator shaft to his death. A maid was found dead, hanging by her neck at the end of the hallway." I sat in transfixed fear at the story the clerk had just told me, and I didn't want to believe it. "But shouldn't we call the police? I saw a body." "Everyone does," the clerk explained. "Even the police have seen the bodies, but have never been able to explain the situations." I didn't know what to do. It was late. I was exhausted and didn't want to cause any more disturbances. Reluctantly, I returned to my room. I took the elevator and held my breath as the car passed the sealed-off 8th floor. As I approached my room, I saw something wet on the floor outside my door. It was my phone. Phoebe has always hated Halloween. Even back when we were dating, she never came to any Halloween parties with me. She always seemed to have an excuse. I have a cold. I have a headache. I think I ate something bad. After we got married and moved into the suburbs, she wouldn't even join me in handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. I think I'm gonna head to bed, she'd say, even though it was only 6 o'clock. She'd even ask me to leave the house because I was making too much noise. I let it slide for a while, until Anthony was born. Come on, we have to go trick-or-treating. Anthony was dressed up as the cutest little pumpkin, only 8 months old. He smiled as I bounced him in my arms, looking out the door into the night. I'm really not feeling well, Phoebe replied, lingering on the stairs. You seemed fine 10 minutes ago. Well, I don't feel fine now. I don't believe you. It was mean, but I was annoyed. She'd given me that same excuse for 8 Halloweens in a row. It wasn't a coincidence. She didn't deny it, just looked past me, into the night. Why do you hate Halloween? Is it because your parents were so strict? I know you weren't allowed to trick-or-treat growing up. Can you just take Anthony alone? I want to go as a family. She glanced again at the darkness gathering outside. Then she pressed her lips into a thin line. I'm sorry, but I don't feel good. A heavy silence settled between us. She came down the stairs, wrapped her arms around both of us, and patted Anthony softly on the head. I love you both. Have fun tonight. From the way her voice slightly wavered, I could have sworn she was on the verge of tears. But she turned away, and in a flash of dark hair, she was already up the stairs. The same dance happened over and over again, every year. Anthony was soon wearing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Star Wars costumes instead of little pumpkins. But Phoebe still refused to go trick-or-treating with us. Every year we had the same discussion. I'd ask her to come. She insisted she wasn't feeling well. She went upstairs to our bedroom and locked the door. And then Anthony and I headed out to the sidewalk, candy bucket swinging. Except, on the evening of Halloween 2021, we came home early. Anthony had tripped and skinned his knee, so less than an hour after we had left, we were hobbling home. As we rounded the bend onto Maple Avenue, I saw that the light in our room was on. Phoebe hadn't gone to sleep like she said she was. I helped Anthony with his wound, set him up in front of the TV, and then charged upstairs. I was mad. She must have heard us come home. She must have heard Anthony crying in the kitchen, and she didn't even come down to check on us. Whether her aversion to Halloween was psychological or some sort of more religious thing, it had to stop. But as soon as I got to the top of the stairs, I froze. Phoebe's voice was coming from our room. She was talking to someone. I tiptoed to the door and pressed my ear against it. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but her voice was low, fast, soft, like she was trying not to be heard. My body went cold. I turned the doorknob, but it was locked. Phoebe, let me in. The light coming from under the door went out. I know you're in there, I shouted. Seconds ticked by. A clatter sounded from behind the door. Then, finally, it opened. Phoebe darted out, quickly closing the door behind her. She looked significantly worse than just an hour ago. Her skin was pale and deep bags under her eyes. You shouldn't be home this early, she whispered. Who's in there with you? No one. She glanced back at the closed door. You and Anthony need to get out of here, now. What's going on? Mike. She was cut off by a soft thump. Someone was knocking on our bedroom door. Something about the knocks made my whole body go cold. They were slow, methodical, like the person on the other side had all the time in the world. Who's in there? I whispered. She glanced back at the door again. her eyes wide. Do you remember the time I got a really bad asthma attack? I told you about it when we first started dating. How I was in the hospital for weeks. How I almost died. Thump, thump. What's that got to do with anything? I should have died, but I didn't. And now, every Halloween, I have to give it some of my life. In payment, without another word, she pushed the door open. In the center of the darkened room stood a towering form. Black robes hung off its thin frame, trailing on the ground. A large jack-o'-lantern sat on its shoulders, its eyes flickering amber, the mouth cut into a wide grin. The only parts of its body visible were its hands, long, gray, bone-thin fingers that ended in sharp nails. It stood in the corner of the room, absolutely still. Phoebe turned away from me. She walked towards the thing, her legs shaking underneath her. The jack-o'-lantern raised a bony finger and touched her forehead, and then it crumbled into a mass of black fabric at her feet. Phoebe turned around, her mouth stretched into a wide grin as her eyes locked onto mine. Then she stepped toward me, emitting a horrible, guttural laugh. I ran out of the bedroom. "Anthony!" I shouted, finding him still in front of the TV. I grabbed him and ran outside. We leaped into the car and peeled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I could see her, or should I say, its silhouette, in the upstairs window, watching us. Nothing is what it seems on Craigslist, or so I should have known. That's on me. Bill came through the door in an ill-fitting black suit that could have fit a donkey. He was a plump man that busted at the seams, his chin still sprinkled from the donut or pastry he had for lunch. "Sorry I'm late." He straightened and fixed his belt below his belly. "Had an emergency." People with greasy slicked back hair and seedy dispositions are destined to be used car salesmen. Unfortunately, this one was my real estate agent. He took me on a tour through the apartment. It was a rundown place, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. The ceiling sunk in places, mold saturated the walls and air. It tasted like mossy growth, and things were quite damp. Though, it was certainly not deserving of the cheapest place in the city. There was something I wasn't seeing. Eh, as you can see." He hobbled around the lounge making wide gestures. "Couple things to fix up, obviously. The walls and floorboards creak, the fridge acting up a little strange, couple leaks when the rain comes through." I stroked my 5 o'clock shadow pensively. "I've been sitting on it for a while, Bill. Something just doesn't add up, you know? This place is dirt cheap. Like dirt cheap." He too fiddled with his beard, freeing some crumbs onto my potential new carpet. "Get you some new appliances, scrub the mold, she'll be perfect." I shook my head. "Bill, cut to the chase." I stared at him intensely. "What's wrong with the place?" Ah, he exhaled in defeat, helpless like he was caught in a mousetrap. He palmed sweat away from his greasy forehead. "There was a woman, an old lady." I gestured him to sit on one of the dusty, out-of-date stools. "The Japanese would classify this place as a stigmatized property. Yeah, that's what they call it over there." He sat down. "Please explain." "Well, it's not uncommon in Japan for a place to be on the market for 20 years after someone dies a lonely death, or worse, in their own home. You know, the public think it's cursed, that the previous occupant wanders the halls." I didn't believe in all that mumbo-jumbo. I saw only dollar signs. To be a student and rent my own place was a luxury. Well, signing the agreement was contingent on one thing. How'd the old woman die? His eyes scanned the carpet for a while, and he gulped, almost comically. You don't want to know, chap. I started to say something but trailed off. I thought about it for a while. Maybe he was right. Ignorance is bliss. I couldn't stay put if I knew I had been eating on the kitchen counter where she was stabbed, the bed she was strangled in, that I bathed myself in the bathtub she once filled with blood. I could get this place cleaned up without the gruesome details. I reached out to Bill with one reluctant arm. Dill. We shook hands. He gave me a quick nod and a smirk. I smiled too. So, how about you throw in a new fridge? He threw his head back and bellowed a fat man's laugh. Maybe for Christmas, Jeff. The first few nights at the apartment were drearily usual. Nothing amiss. Most nights after, I consoled myself that I had been dreaming. Dreaming the type of dream that Dr. Ron had told me about. The ones where I couldn't move, like I was paralyzed. He called them by some fancy names and told me to stop sleeping on my back. I tried to stop, but every time I ended up on my back, and no matter how hard I tried, she'd be there, standing at the end of my bed. Those are the evenings I would begin to pray for. The nights I would only see the silhouette of the woman, not hear her. In the following weeks I would be woken up by gentle clatters, like she wanted to be quiet. She didn't want me to know that she was there. I would hear steps along the floor in the living room, wandering the house. I heard the water running from the tap, only for a while, and only in the dead of night, like something was drinking. After a while, though, she wanted me to know that she was there, that she was hungry. It was Thursday when I knew she was living in the walls. I sat alone reading with my back against my headboard. Rain sprayed against the window beside me, obscuring the bustling cityscape beyond my apartment's eye with glassy droplets. Sucking my cigarette, I exhaled and waved the smoke away from my book. Tap, tap, tap. Something rapped against the bedchamber wall. It was coming from the living room, or maybe the kitchen. I put my book down beside me and slinked out of bed. The hallway was dim and silent, save for the sound of the waves of rain thrashing against the window pane. Hello? I called. There was no reply. Tap, tap, tap. I sluggishly pulled myself forward, through the hall and into the living room. The room smelled sickly. Decaying wafts of sour breath lingered in the air. A low glow beamed onto the old-school tiles of the damp kitchen. The fridge had been left open. I was certain I had shut the door before bed. When the sound of the rain had been pulled away by the wind, my ears twitched at the sound of the tap left running. I briskly made my way over to the kitchen, the floors creaking as I went. I turned the tap and closed the door to the fridge. I stared at it for a while. A seed of doubt blossomed in my mind. Was I just forgetful? Lights off. I scanned the lounge and kitchen. Nothing amiss. Jeff, you're just being careless. I smirked at my mistake. Had to get some milk in the morning. It was probably spoiled. In the hallway, my ears pricked. Tap, tap, tap. Something was behind me. I darted down the hall. I passed the toilet and study room and threw myself into my bed. It took me a while to catch my breath. The noise came from the apartment. It was in the walls. My head pounded from my rapid heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. I heard it distantly through my bedroom door. My pillow fit around my ears snugly. Go away. Please, just go away. For a while, I was buried in my pillow, unable to sleep. The tiredness caught up with me eventually, and I fell into a deep sleep like a daydream or a fever. Things got worse for me at that apartment. Much, much worse. One afternoon started wonderfully, though. I called Rosie, and we agreed on a date. See you at 9? I talked into my cell phone, combing my hair in the bedroom mirror. Great, I'll see you then. I hummed a happy tune on my way to the bathroom. If I were in a rom-com, there would have been a spring in my step. Maybe there was. I made my way to the kitchen. A quick snack before dinner with Rosie. No biggie. What a beautiful, beautiful quiet afternoon. Sunlight beamed in a brilliant yellow through the windows. On days like these, impatient city folks stop their incessant honking outside to smell the roses and let birds sing their song. In the kitchen, I almost tripped on shoddy tiling. My heart stopped. The fridge was open. Just a crack. My jaw tightened. The birds had stopped singing. All I could hear in my apartment was the forceful whistle of my breath escaping me. The apple I went to grab was rotten. A contorted mouth-shaped hole had been bitten away at its flesh, yellowing the fruit. Inspecting the apple, I lost my appetite. Long strands of black hair were deeply ingrained in its flesh. I shuddered and let go. It rolled for a while. A single broken tooth had found its way out of the apple and onto my floor. That night I called Rosie again. We settled on a movie instead. Make no mistake, I called Bill, my real estate agent, about the place. I think you can guess how that went. I had to take matters into my own hands. A few nights later, I decided to wait for it. I sat in the dark lounge of the apartment, finishing the final chapters of my book. Though, when you wait for these things, they seldom come. They come at you when you least expect it. Yawning, I pushed out of my chair and made my way into the kitchen. Some buttered bread, a salad sandwich perhaps. My stomach rumbled. I stopped in my tracks in the middle of the kitchen. Tap. There it was again. How it felt to be afraid in my own home. A distant sound. One long fingernail meeting plastic. Tap, tap. My hand met the cold metal of the fridge handle. I didn't want to open the door. I assured my stomach nothing was waiting for me, but my heart didn't get the memo. It was quiet in the apartment again. My eyes shut tight as I inhaled. The handle turned. The fridge seal peeled open with a stomach-curdling thip. The interior light wasn't on. From standing, I could only poke around the top shelf. It was empty inside, except for a few condiments and rotten vegetables. I wiped one sweaty palm on my leg and bent down to inspect the bottom shelves, rummaging in the cold void of its white shell. It was clean, yet smelled rotten and sour, the trailing scent of a garbage truck. Extending my arm into the unlit fridge, I met something hairy and brittle in the darkness. It might as well have been a vile, moldy coconut. I retracted. I couldn't see anything, though it felt as if a ball of scraggly hair filled my hand like sand. It flowed between my fingers like a soaked kitchen sponge. She hadn't been living in the walls. An icy grip tightened around my forearm. I shrieked and tried to yank away. The old woman's body twisted and buckled at the joints. One leg was bending backward over her shoulder, the other firmly planted below her jaw. She stared up at me from inside the fridge, slowly reeling me in from my wrist to my arm like she was a flexible acrobat carefully climbing a fleshy rope. I tried not to puke. I swallowed sour spit. Cockroaches scurried from her open lips and spread across her face like wildfire. Teeth clattered as the woman grinned, squeezing one of the insects with a sickening pop in the space where her tooth should have been. Maggots exhumed themselves from her fleshy skin, dropping onto my sweaty arm like Satan's rain. Frigid gripping fingers closed in at my forearm, then my bicep, pulling, pulling, pulling. I bent my head up to steady myself and toe backward, my chin plastered onto the cold top of the fridge. Pulling hard enough sent me flying back, crawling on the floor free from her decaying hands. The woman's face stared at me through scraggly silver and graphite strands of hair, two gleaming white sockets over a wide, disgusting smile. I kicked the door shut and lay on the floor, my chest heaving. My mouth tasted like bitter acid, and my hand finally let go of the unkempt wire I had pulled from her head. Many nights have passed since that encounter. Bill still rents me the apartment. When I hang out with Rosie, we always go back to her place, never mine. I keep grandmother fed so she doesn't wander the halls. I don't sleep much anymore, but it's okay, because I have the cheapest apartment in the city. When I'm home, I hear her when she's hungry. Tap, tap, tap. I happened upon the book at a kiosk in my town's annual witchcraft festival. The seller, a young red-haired woman, told me it was known as the Book of Memories. If you wrote down a recollection on one of its many blank pages and closed the book shut, it would vanish from your memories forever, or those of others. Only $14.99. This was a strange way to sell a diary, I thought, but the cover was remarkable, pitch black with an embossed rune I had never seen before. Despite the bogus backstory, I was intrigued, transfixed by its design. Even if I never put it to use, it would fit nicely with my ever-growing collection of odd supernatural relics, most of which were just strange craft items from Etsy. Just as I was about to hand over my debit card, the woman spoke. It can be yours for free, depending on your answer to this question. Do you have a troubled past? I looked at her, utterly confused. Yeah, but who doesn't? She made eye contact for an uncomfortable period of time, and then smiled, handing me the book. Her behavior was very strange, but I was more than happy to not spend any money. As such, I thanked her and went about my day. Upon coming home that night and venturing up to my bedroom, I threw the book beside my pillow and grabbed a head of lettuce from the mini fridge to feed my pet tortoise, Harold. He was off in the corner, chewing up one of my stuffed animals, as he so often did when famished. I pulled the plush aside and broke off some greenery to placate his hunger. He was pleased. I sat on the bed and picked up my new collectible. I thought for a moment about the seller's words and decided to prove her wrong, at least to myself, if for no other reason than to have a good laugh at her expense. I grabbed the nearest pen and jotted down Harold's name in one of its many folds. I then shut the book and waited. I looked over at Harold, eating his lettuce. I was not startled by his presence, knowing exactly who he was and remembering every facet of his life. My parents gifted him to me as a youngling before their untimely passing. I was very close with them, so the time immediately following their funeral was truly trying. Harold was there for me. I fell in love with that stupid green face of his. He kept me company when I was at my worst and provided a shell for me to cry on. You could say that he saved me in a way, a torch that guided me through dark times. But Harold was no youngling anymore. His surface area took up a decent portion of floor space. similar in size to a large tire. I watched as a bit of lettuce fell from his mouth and then chuckled. Silly hair. In saying this, something happened. I choked on my words. I still knew my pet tortoise, but I could not for the life of me think of his name. I panicked, but looked over at the herb garden on the windowsill, a place for his treats to grow in the sun. Above it was a sign I'd made. Harold's Garden. The name was completely new to me. I had no memory of ever coming up with it. The book didn't delete him from my memory, only his name. But it actually worked. Was the woman at the festival a real witch? This was a shocking revelation. I now had the power to erase any of my memories with the flick of a pen, or those of others. I remembered the woman's words. She specifically said it could erase my memories, or those of others. But how could I do the latter? I scoured the book for clues and came across a page at its end with a different format than the blank ones before it. Person. Memory. I thought for a moment. Excited, an idea came to mind that I quickly acted on. After turning on my TV and flipping over to the news channel, I put my theory to the test. In the top box, I wrote the anchor's name. In the bottom, the memory of how to speak. Cruel, yes, but I desperately needed to know, and half expected it wouldn't work. Upon closing the book and opening it again, the ink vanished. I patiently waited for a result. In a matter of moments, the anchor stopped talking and bore a look of intense confusion. He continued to open his mouth, but no words came out. Eventually, the footage was cut short due to technical difficulties. It actually fucking worked. This was my chance. I could now do what I always dreamed of doing, and I wasn't going to wait another second to put my plan in motion. The door to his house was locked, but it was easy enough to bust open. There he was, a pitiful excuse for a man, relaxing in front of his TV, as if he had the right to do so. Surprised by my arrival, he questioned me. Who are you? He stood up and began walking to my position. I was prepared for this, having already written in the book. After shutting it, his legs gave out, as he completely forgot how to walk. He now had the motor skills of a toddler and was helpless to my attack. He cried out, but this was futile. Another quick bend of the book's binding kept him from ever speaking again. Now, he could only listen. How does it feel, Robert, being so helpless and fearing what might come next? He looked up at me, the face of a scared boy painted on an old man. Good. That's how my parents felt when you crashed into their car and drove away. The highway was empty that night. You were the only one who could help. If you had just called someone, they might have lived. I never even had the chance to say goodbye. He tried swinging at me with his arms, but another scribbling in the book put a stop to that. You don't deserve to get away with it. There wasn't enough evidence in my favor, but I knew it was you. I was there. I saw your face when you walked up to the wreckage. I screamed out for you to help us, but you drove off anyway. A frightened child in a man's body. You probably didn't expect I would survive. His mangled form shook in an attempt to move, with what little memory of this action he had left. It was no use. Now, you will suffer, just as I have over the years, forced to live without them. Goodbye, Robert. You won't be missed. With one final closing of the magical tome, I erased his ability to breathe. I then left, satisfied with the mission accomplished. I had already collected the names of his neighbors, so it was easy enough to erase any memory of me ever being in the area. I was sure I wouldn't be caught. After all was said and done, I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in years. There was only one thing left to do. I drove to the local cemetery, strolled through the headstones, and stopped at my parents' grave. I sat there for a good long while, not yet ready to say goodbye. Mom, Dad, I did it. I took care of him, just like I always said I would. A steady stream of tears trickled down my cheeks. It's over now. You can finally rest. I opened the book one last time. I was going to erase them from my memory, once and for all. It was the only way I could ever truly be at peace. I miss you terribly. Things have been pretty dicey here without you, but Harold and I have been getting by as best we can. If I could change things, I would take your place in a heartbeat. But I can't, and that's why I have to do this. The pain is too much to bear. There was now a flood of tears wetting my face. I never had the chance to say it before, so I will now. Goodbye. I love you both so much. Before I could jot down the appropriate words, a cross-section of space opened up in front of me. An oval-shaped portal of swirling energy, from which a woman stepped out. The vortex vanished, and as she pried the book from my hands, knocking me back in the process. It was the seller from the kiosk at the festival, the one who gave me the book. She opened it up and stroked the pages in a meditative trance, all while licking her lips. With a look of pure satisfaction, she opened her eyes and turned to me, frozen in fear on the ground. With every memory I acquire, my demons feed from the darkness within. The sadness and spite with which you acted, the vengeance. These will do nicely. She took a single step in my direction. My heart pounded. Who would have thought? A witch living among mortals. I was lucky to sense your presence and act when I did. My darlings and I were starving. I digested her initial statement and bore a look of shock. Witch? You think I'm a witch? She cackled. Of course you are, child. You would not have been able to use the book otherwise. Did your parents never tell you? I slowly shook my head, still fearful. Stranger still, it's unfortunate you'll never be able to explore your latent abilities. In order to capture the memories you've collected, I must seal them with your blood. We locked eyes. She pondered a brief moment before speaking again. But first, let's see what other repressions we can dredge to the surface. With great precision, her hands moved in a circular motion, a fantastic glow pouring from her fingertips. She drew an intricate design in the air, the same one from the book's cover. She finished by flicking it over to me. I tried to run, but the rune flew at a velocity my legs couldn't hope to match. Its glow enveloped me. I could no longer see anything else. Then, it dissipated, revealing my new surroundings. The woman had inflicted me with a visual hallucination. At the time, it felt all too real. My parents, they were alive. We were sitting at the dinner table in my childhood home. The food was delicious, the company even better. We talked and ate for a long while, for a time frame that could never have been long enough. I was happy, but then the thread was pulled, undoing the charade. The expression on my parents' faces changed abruptly from smiling to stoic. They stared directly at me, piercing my soul with empty eyes. My father spoke first. Why did you live? My heart fell back in my chest. I couldn't respond. My mother chimed in and broke the silence. "Why didn't you save us?" Before I can even hope to form a reply, they stood up from the table and walked around to my sides. They then lunged at me, to which I winced and took cover beneath the haphazard safety of my own arms. There was no attack. I unraveled myself and was greeted by a new environment. I was back at the cemetery, but not in my own time. It was another memory, one I would have rather died before reliving. The funeral was just as I remembered. In the particular portion I was experiencing, I had asked the guests and other associated parties to leave. I wanted some alone time with my parents. Standing between the caskets, the sentiments I had rehearsed to myself earlier in the day escaped me, leaving me with only tears that quickly formed a puddle on the ground below. I couldn't bear their sight any longer. The mortician did a wonderful job of hiding the wounds, but no amount of makeup could hide the feeling that resonated from their corpses. I stepped away to gather the other guests, ready to lower my family into the earth. This is when the memory diverted its course. Hearing a rustling behind me, I turned back to the coffins on display at the edge of the cemetery. The guests had magically returned, and were now standing as still as ever, staring me down with sullen faces. My parents had arisen from their caskets and were standing at the front of the crowd with blackened eyes. They all moved towards me. I tried to escape, but they were always there. No matter where I pointed myself to run, they quickly surrounded me and closed in. I screamed. The scene melted away and I was back in my own time, standing opposite the mysterious woman. Perfect. That fear and anguish you feel. Such a wonderful taste. My darlings and I will feast for a whole year. She licked her lips some more. Now, the fun part. It's time to steal your memories away forever. You must perish. A wicked smile danced across her face. I trembled as she reached her arms out to attack. That's when the most peculiar thing happened. Another tear in space opened up directly in front of me. Harold trotted out from the void. He extended his neck and opened his mouth, out from which a green blast was expelled. The woman barely had time to dodge the blow. Her smile was now replaced with a look of surprise. "You have a familiar?" She adjusted herself and sent a glowing, black bolt of lightning at Harold. He retreated into his shell and spun in the same place on the ground, deflecting the attack. He came back out and immediately craned his neck back to see me. I can't explain it, but I swear he was making sure I was okay. It was this feeling that washed over me. In that moment, I felt safe for the first time since my parents died, protected by a warm, loving energy. Harold turned back to face the sorceress. He awkwardly galloped toward her. From his mouth, he shot an expansive blast of green light, filling my entire field of view. I didn't cover my eyes in reaction to its brightness. It was somehow soothing to look at. I was captivated by its blow. When it made contact, it shrunk to outline the woman's form. Her shape writhed within before the light finally faded, revealing only a skeletal structure that disintegrated to ash and fell to the earth below. I directed my attention to Harold. He was back in his shell. Was he okay? Had he exerted too much energy? I rushed over, panicked. I had never seen him so still. Even when he slept, I didn't know what else to do, so I just laid my head on him while tears rolled down my sides. Please, Harold, don't disappear like Mom and Dad did. You're all I have left. I still need you. There was no movement. I can't do this without you. You can't leave, okay? Do you hear me in there? Come back! Harold's limbs and head slowly slid out of the crevices of his shell. He nuzzled up to me with what little strength he had left, clearly exhausted. I let out a shriek of joy and hugged that stupid green face of his. The nightmare was over. We could finally go home and rest. I'm not sure if the book survived the blast, but that doesn't matter to me anymore. The whole ordeal taught me to never be tempted by the forces of dark magic ever again. I felt it swimming in my veins, flourishing throughout my entire body. I became powerless to its control. I never want to feel that again. As far as I'm concerned, the book can rot in the cemetery with the woman's remains. Despite my age, I'm still a child with many faults to be learned from. But now, I have someone looking out for me. My parents saw to it that I would always be taken care of, no matter what happened to them. Harold is my familiar, but more than that, he is my closest friend. Whatever the world has in store for us, he will be by my side. And that thought comforts me. I will never have to feel alone, ever again. I've had a fear of rats for as long as I can remember. I don't know exactly what it is about them that scares me. It's not just the tail or the way they move or how they sound. It's everything, and it's nothing. To me, rats have always been synonymous with unconditional terror. It all comes from a childhood trauma. A large rat chased me up a hill where I had to hide in a tool shed. The thing seemed rabid, and I had to sit in there for at least an hour, listening to the squeals and cries of the desperate thing that wanted to eat me. It was an unusually big rat, larger than some cats I've seen. It's called musophobia, and up until recently, it hasn't really been an issue. I mean, sure, I can get panic attacks and a flight reaction by just seeing one, but I've been able to keep them out of my life more often than not. Sure, now that I'm a parent, I won't let my 2 kids have a hamster, but I'm pretty sure the Yorkshire Terrier we have keeps them busy. My phobia became an issue not too long ago. I was driving the kids home from school. Traffic was being rerouted for maintenance, so I had to take a smaller dirt road instead of staying on the main. It wasn't far, and there was barely any traffic. The road goes by a set of fishing cabins, set up around the lake, but was extended to lead back to the main road further up ahead. Usually, there's nothing but frogs there. As I drove by, a small family of 6 rats ran straight across the road. This had never happened to me before. My body spasmed and my mind blanketed. I panicked and turned the car straight into a pine tree. It was such a strange feeling. I heard the sound and scream and tried to cover my ears, only to realize I was the one screaming. My oldest daughter managed to call 911. My reaction was far scarier to them than the crash itself. We were fine. I was driving slowly and everyone turned out okay. Even the car was okay, after some light body work. However, my wife insisted I started going to therapy to deal with this terror, once and for all. I couldn't say no. Not again. There aren't many mental health professionals in the nearby area, so the list of available therapists wasn't long. I could go for 2 sessions a week if it wasn't too far away. I was looking for assisted exposure therapy, and truth be told, I was a bit on edge about the whole thing. My wife was the driving force behind this decision, so she pretty much just pointed me where to go. She chose to sign me up for a session with Dr. Jane Bogan. Dr. Jane was excited to see me. She was in her 40s and had this combed-back Elvira-looking hairdo, but without the volume. At first sight, you might mistake her for a medium or a psychic. It wasn't the best first impression, but her credentials checked out. We shook hands, her wrist rattling with jewelry and chains. She insisted I call her Jane. The office was kind of murky. Dark gray wallpaper with a matching carpet, plenty of bookshelves with the desk set up by the corner, and, of course, fancy leather lounge chairs, the kind you can straighten out to lie down in. Her office assistant, Jeremy, offered me coffee and a donut before returning to an adjacent room. Apparently he helped all 4 offices in the building with their scheduling, but Jane was the only one working today. Jeremy was a short, balding man with a tired look. He had some kind of accent, but I couldn't put my finger on what. European, I think. Today, he's all ours, Jane joked. Jeremy didn't laugh. Jane and I had a long talk about my phobia. I told her about the tool shed on top of that greasy hill and the screeching sounds of the rabid rat, the desperate scratching, trying to make a dent in the front door. I told her about the crash and how my body just seized up and refused to let me act. Jane was a very active listener, asking follow-up questions and making notes along the way. She nodded, made eye contact, and seemed very attentive. She was good, and just talking openly about my fear was refreshing. At the end of the first session, Jane explained her thoughts to me. Until next time, I'll present a treatment plan, but I can already say, you're a prime candidate for overexposure therapy. Do you mean exposure therapy? I asked. No, this is different. She smiled and touched my hand. Overexposure therapy is slightly different, but far more effective in the long run. It also doesn't require you to actually meet or touch any rats. It can be done right here in the office. Really? I've never heard of it. I'm licensed to perform it, she said and stood up. She pointed out a diploma next to her desk. Right there, underneath the degree from Minnesota State, was a license from the Board of Behavioral Health and Therapy, BBHT. It looked official enough, and I didn't have any reason to distrust her, so I agreed to discuss it with my wife. Of course, it wasn't much of a discussion. I didn't mind trying something new, and my wife was overjoyed to see me progressing. We tried looking up overexposure therapy, but it didn't give us anything. Most links were just explaining how regular exposure therapy works. I didn't like the idea of facing my fear, but with the guidance of Dr. Jane, it felt a bit easier. She was a professional after all. I called her and agreed to the treatment. She explained it would be best to set aside a full day for it. We booked the upcoming Saturday. It wouldn't be cheap, but she guaranteed a breakthrough. I'd wager my reputation on it. She laughed. The next Saturday, I kissed my wife goodbye and left to see Dr. Jane. I was nervous, but seeing my girls waving goodbye as I pulled out of the driveway, that calmed my heart. They were so worried about me. I had to get better. When I got to Dr. Jane's office, she was waiting for me in the parking lot. Jeremy was there as well. Despite it being a Saturday, my car was the only one in the parking lot, making me wonder if Jane lived nearby and walked to work. As I got out of the car, I noticed Jeremy holding a cup of coffee and a donut. We hadn't even stepped inside yet. He didn't blink much. Glad you could make it, Jane said. It's gonna be a long day. Jeremy handed me the coffee and donut, and we entered the office. One of the lounge chairs was set up so I could lie down. I noticed how Jeremy lingered in the room until Jane stared him down. Then, she turned her attention to me. It felt like I was staring into a furnace. Have a seat. I lied down as she dimmed the lights. Close your eyes and don't be alarmed, she continued. Well, what are you? I didn't have time to say anything else. Jane touched her thumb to my forehead, and my mind was set on fire. That's the only way I can explain the sensation. My mind flared, and there was an intense heat, wave after wave, fanning out from the point on my forehead she touched. Heat, then freezing cold. There was a taste of metal and a smell of burning rubber, like getting a tattoo on my brain. I couldn't open my eyes, and I couldn't feel my hands or feet. It felt like I was sinking into the chair, deeper and deeper. Relax, a disembodied voice demanded. I felt my breathing stopping, my heart slowing. Fire turned to ice. I could have sworn I was dying, but my body didn't respond. I was losing control. Then, my eyes burst open. It felt like breaching the surface after diving too deep. My pulse shot through my body like an automatic rifle. I was shaking, and my eyes teared up. To call it disorienting would be an understatement. I was still in the office, but it was night. I'd arrived at 10 in the morning. Now, it was close to midnight. Jane was gone. Jeremy, too. My pockets were empty. I called out, but there was no response. I was alone. I opened the office door and stepped out of the parking lot, only to realize I was actually far from alone. There was Jeremy. His eyes were wide open and seemed larger than usual. The pupils were different sizes. His mouth was open, like a panting dog, revealing a tongue long enough to reach his belly button. He was completely naked and covered in deep, bloodless cuts. He stood in the middle of the parking lot under the single working light post. He seemed taller, like stretched soft plastic. We locked eyes. His mouth curled into a smile, never blinking, never closing his mouth. And now, he was sprinting towards me with complete abandon. Naked feet slapped against the concrete. He almost tripped as he stumbled across the curb. I slammed the door shut. Jeremy's entire body weight slammed against the door with a deep splat. The door buckled, but held. Jeremy was screaming. It was a pained, primal shriek, like someone being set on fire. All-enveloping pain, expressed in a rasping and dry voice. I hurried back into the office. One of the bookshelves looked loose, so with enough force I'd be able to tip it. I had to try. The bookshelf itself wasn't heavy, but the over 100 books on psychology held it down. I summoned all my strength and tipped the whole thing in front of the door. I sat down, back to the bookshelf. I noticed I was screaming too, yelling at him to stop and leave me alone. It wasn't a conscious decision. It just happened. I was so disoriented. It seemed like time was standing still. As Jeremy broke through the door leading in from the parking lot, I braced myself. He flung himself against the office door, but the added weight of the bookshelf and myself was enough to keep it shut. "Stop!" I heard myself scream. "Please, just stop!" I scrambled to hold him back, cutting my thumb open on a splinter. I didn't even notice until my hand started slipping from the blood. As I stared across the room, I could see the full moon outside the office window. Slowly, a face appeared on the other side of the glass. Stepping out of the dark, a woman I'd never seen before. Hairless, also with deep cuts across her skin. Eyes wide, pupils differently sized. Her mouth wide open, her long tongue pressed against the glass like a dying eel. "No," I heard myself sigh. "Please, just, no." She nodded as her mouth turned into a sinister smile. Using her arms and face, she started to break herself against the glass. She didn't bleed from the cuts. I didn't know what to do until the glass shattered. I bolted to the left, through the side door into the hallway. I followed the corridor to the right as the office door broke behind me. Jeremy was through. I could hear the two of them panting as they chased me. I saw two options: get out through a window or lock myself in the bathroom. I refused to corner myself, so I chose the window. I smashed it with my elbow and climbed out, feeling cold fingers brush against my neck. It was cold outside and dark. I just ran, hearing the panting behind me. I followed a path into a pine forest, getting scratches from the trees across my face. It's nothing short of a miracle that I didn't trip. I paid no attention to my feet. As the ground turned upwards to a hill, I lost my breath. I knew this hill, and this couldn't be here. It was the same hill where I'd been chased into a tool shed as a kid, and there it was. There was nowhere else for me to go. They were faster, and I had to find cover. This was impossible. I'd done this once before, and now I was doing it again. I ran up the hill, flung the old wooden door open, and shut it behind me. The door had a side bolt, so I locked it. There were no windows, but the entire shed was flimsy at best. I cursed myself. This was just another dead end. For minutes, it was quiet. Maybe they hadn't followed me. Maybe they took a different path. I relaxed my breath, feeling blood return to my fingers and toes. Then, they came. They smashed themselves against the door. They tore at the frail planks. The pain screams exploded and echoed across the hillside. I couldn't hear myself think. Desperate, I looked where to go next, but I was cornered. It can't end like this, I panted. It can't. It won't. Not like this. I cried. I pleaded. There were more of them now. At least 6. One of the planks on the left side broke off, and 5 arms reached for me. Pale arms, with deep bloodless cuts. The moon reflected unblinking eyes and long slithering tongues. Not like this. The slide bolt had lost 2 screws. It was a matter of seconds. No, no. I armed myself with a claw hammer as the door bust open. Jeremy was the first in, but I didn't get the chance to attack. 3 different arms grabbed me, disarmed me, and pushed me onto the floor. Cold, naked flesh pressed against me. Countless eager faces drooled with delight as teeth pierced my neck. Then, I woke up. The clock showed 20 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. I was on the floor of Dr. Jane's office, curled up in a fetal position. There was a cold towel on my head, and Dr. Jane was calmly stroking my shoulder. My head was warm, and a great headache was subsiding. Jeremy was nowhere around. "There we go," she whispered. "You're fine, you're fine." I couldn't speak. I was shaking like a leaf. Jane helped me back up to my seat. "That was the end of your treatment." She smiled. "You're all done." What? What? What was? I had completely forgotten why I was there in the first place. Jane reached for something. "Hold out your hands," she said. I did as she asked. A second later, a small white mouse was placed in my palms. The confused little thing just sniffed me and stood on its hind legs. I didn't react. In my mind, I was about to be eaten alive just seconds ago. "You seem to be cured." Jane smiled. "Treatment successful. You can give him back now, if you want." I wouldn't mind holding him for a bit. I really didn't. I wanted the little mouse to stay. It was a tiny comfort. A living creature I could feel meant me no harm. "Good," nodded Jane. "So, what what happened?" "You were overexposed," said Jane, filling out some paperwork. "An extreme stress reaction dampens all other reactions." "I don't understand." "Say you have an oven with 4 settings," she continued. 4 being the highest setting. That's where you were, with your fear of rats. Maximum power, strength 4. She handed the paper over to me. It was a bill for the day. I changed your maximum setting to 10. Suddenly a 4 doesn't seem so bad. But how? She sat down across from me and locked her eyes to mine. There was something dark in there. A hint of red. I'm very good at what I do. She took my hand and turned it over. That's when I noticed the cut along my thumb. I was allowed to keep the white mouse. I bought him a little cage, some toys, and plenty of food. When I got home that night, my wife couldn't believe her eyes. My girls named the mouse Kenny, and he was gently played with late into the night. Much to our Yorkie's dismay, my wife called it a miracle, but I didn't know what to call it. My mind was still in a daze. I found myself thinking back to that day. It wasn't a dream or a vision. It was real. It had to be. Thumbs don't cut themselves on imaginary splinters. Sometimes, I find myself staring into the mirror, seeing my pupils dilate into different sizes. It feels like my tongue has grown longer. Hell, my forehead seemed to have a slight magnetic pull where Dr. Jane touched me. It's a very unusual kind of headache. There was also an incident just a few days ago where I cut my finger dicing potatoes. Not a drop of blood came out. I barely even felt it. I can't bring myself to go back to Dr. Jane. If there is even a slight chance she'll put me back on that hill, I won't ever talk to her or see her again. I might have had the fear of rats scared out of me, but it has been replaced by this deep, existential dread of what Dr. Jane could do to me if she wanted to. What has she done to me? And why can't I bleed?